wind howled like 1,000 dying men that night. Out beyond the black jagged teeth of the Maine coastline, the sea churned under a swollen, moonless sky. Somewhere in that darkness, a bell clanged, slow, irregular, like the heartbeat of a dying giant. And then, through the fog, a single light appeared on the horizon. It swayed once, twice, and then steadied, a pale beacon cutting through the mist. Sailors would later swear they saw it first from 5 miles out. A promise of safety, a guide to the harbor's embrace. What they didn't know, what no one outside the keeper's house could ever know, was that this light was not salvation. It was the beginning of their end. By morning, pieces of a shattered schooner would wash ashore. By morning, the gulls would be feasting. The year was 1883, and the Eastcliff Lighthouse stood at the very edge of the known world, or so the locals liked to say. A narrow iron spiral climbed up through its stone belly, ending in the lantern room, a place both holy and cursed, depending on who you asked. On this particular night, Keeper Elias Wren stood alone in that glass-walled chamber, one hand on the brass railing, the other wrapped around a lantern, not the great Fresnel light that was meant to guide ships, but a smaller handheld lamp with an unsettling crimson glow. Outside, waves slammed into the rocks with enough force to shake the stone under his boots. The official light, the one paid for by the Crown's Maritime Fund, was dark, extinguished. Elias had snuffed it himself not 30 minutes before, leaving only his crimson lamp swinging slowly in the window. Somewhere out there, a 3-masted bark named Morning Star was fighting the storm, her captain steering by the one beacon he could see. He thought he was heading for safe water. He was wrong. Elias's eyes were pale gray, sharp as splinters, and they never left the shifting glow of the fog. He was waiting for the first sound, the one he'd come to crave. That evening in the keeper's house, Elias sat at a table set for one. A boiled potato, a hunk of salt pork, and a mug of black tea. The room smelled faintly of oil and brine. On the mantel above the hearth sat an object wrapped in oilcloth. He glanced at it once, as though checking it was still there. Outside, the sea was calm now. Deceptively so. The wreck had already begun its silent descent into rumor. But Elias knew storms came in more forms than wind and rain. His storm was still gathering, and when it broke, it would drown more than ships. The days after the wreck of the Morning Star passed in uneasy silence. Officially, the cause was navigational error in poor weather. The village paper printed a single column about the tragedy, tucked between a story on rising fish prices and an advertisement for patent medicines. But in Greymouth's back alleys and along the docks, the whispers had sharpened into accusations, spoken only when the wind was high enough to carry the words away. Thomas Vale found himself replaying the dying sailor's words over and over. Red light, let us. It didn't match any official maritime signal, nor any he'd seen in 20 years as harbor master. One night, unable to sleep, he set out along the cliff road toward the lighthouse. The moon was veiled behind thin clouds, turning the world to shades of ash. The sea below was calm, but Vale's gut told him storms didn't have to howl to be dangerous. When he reached the keeper's house, the door was ajar. The faint glow of oil lamps spilled into the night, along with the slow, rhythmic creak of the spiral stairs inside. Vale stepped in, his boots echoing. "Elias," he called. No answer. He climbed, the scent of salt and old brass growing stronger with each step. Near the top, he heard something else, a low, murmured voice. It was Elias, speaking to someone, or something. In the lantern room, the massive Fresnel lens loomed like the eye of a leviathan. Elias stood with his back to Vale, one hand resting on the glass. The other held that same crimson lamp Vale had seen on the night of the wreck. Its glow was muted now, but enough to paint Elias's pale face in ghostly shades. "You see them," Elias was saying in a voice barely above a whisper. "You find them for me. Every one of them." Vale froze in the shadows. There was no one else in the room. The air seemed to thicken, as if the light itself was listening. Without turning, Elias spoke again, this time louder. "They took her from me, every last soul among them, and now the sea will take them." Val left before Elias could see him, his pulse hammering in his ears. He knew the rumors about the keeper's wife, Margaret Wren, how she drowned in 1879 when the Wellington Belle struck rocks not a mile from the lighthouse. She'd been aboard to surprise him on his birthday. The sea had claimed her, along with 32 others, but no one had ever spoken of revenge, until now. 2 nights later, another storm rose. This one came, sudden and brutal, whipping the coastline with sheets of rain. From the village, Vale could see the lighthouse beam sweeping the black horizon in its usual slow arc. Then, as he watched, it flickered, once, twice, and went out. In its place, a dim, red glow appeared. Not steady, swinging, like a lure. Vale didn't wait for the tide to bring the truth to shore. He grabbed a lantern, his oilskin coat, and headed for the cliffs. By the time he reached the keeper's house, the storm was a living thing, slamming against him with claws of wind. The door was locked now, but he forced it open and plunged into the stairwell. From above came the sound of glass rattling in its frame, and a voice, Elias's voice, chanting in some old tongue Vale didn't recognize. When he burst into the lantern room, the sight stopped him cold. A crimson lamp hung from the ceiling by a chain, swinging over the extinguished Fresnel lens. Around it, on the glass walls, strange shapes writhed, shadows of men with broken limbs, their mouths open in silent screams. Elias turned, and for a moment his eyes seemed not gray but black, as if the pupils had swallowed the iris entirely. "You shouldn't be here, Thomas," he said. The wind howled, and the sea answered like a beast. Below them, through the rain-streaked glass, Vale saw it, a brigantine, sails half shredded, bearing straight for the rocks. And Elias, smiling now. The brigantine hit the rocks with a scream of timber and a roar of white water. The sound cut through the storm like a cannon blast. From the lantern room, Thomas Vale watched her masts snap like dry twigs, watched her crew spill into the boiling sea, helpless, flailing shapes vanishing beneath the foam. Elias Wren stood perfectly still, his face lit in the crimson glow, eyes fixed on the chaos below. If he heard the cries, he didn't flinch. If he felt the vibration of death on the wind, he didn't show it. "You're murdering them," Vale shouted over the gale. Elias turned slowly, like a man waking from a dream. "No, Thomas, I'm balancing the scales." When Vale lunged for the crimson lamp, Elias moved with startling speed, shoving him back toward the stairs. The force sent Vale sprawling, his lantern shattering at his feet. Glass bit into his palms as he scrambled upright, the smell of oil sharp in the air. "You don't understand," Elias said, advancing. 4 years ago, they watched her drown, 32 souls, and not one of them tried to save her. They cut the boats loose and let the sea take her so they could save themselves. Vale's voice was raw. "You can't kill every ship that passes here. Not every sailor. They were all complicit," Elias snapped. "Every ship that trades in Grimace Harbor profits from those men's survival. The sea will take them in her own time. But I hasten her justice." Lightning struck somewhere close, shaking the glass walls. In that flash, Vale saw something he hadn't before. Etched faintly into the base of the crimson lamp were symbols, jagged and alien, as if carved by a trembling hand into brass. The chain it hung from was blackened, pitted as though it had been pulled from a fire. "What did you do, Elias?" Vale whispered. Elias's expression was unreadable. "I asked the sea for her back. She gave me something else." That night, Vale stumbled back to the village through the storm. He didn't speak of what he'd seen. Not to the tavern men, not even to the priest. The truth was too impossible, too dangerous. But in his gut, he knew this was no longer a matter of one man's madness. The sea itself had taken a side. 3 days later, the storm had passed. The wreckage of the brigantine live, and bodies were still being pulled from the tide pools. Val was down by the shoreline when a cry went up from one of the fishermen. They'd found Jonas Creel, the carpenter's boy. He'd been alive the night before, mending nets with his father. Now he lay face up in the surf, skin as pale as bone, eyes open wide. There was no sign of injury, no bruising, no broken bones, just a faint salt crust on his lips, as if he drowned in bed. The priest crossed himself. The sea takes who she will, but Vale saw something the others didn't. Around the boy's wrist was a thin, black thread, knotted twice. He'd seen one like it hanging from the chain of the crimson lamp. That evening, Vale walked the cliff path again, but this time he didn't go to the keeper's house. Instead, he stood at the edge of the rocks where the waves foamed and churned. In the darkening water, shapes moved. Not fish, not seals. Faces, pale and bloated, drifting just beneath the surface. Some he recognized from the morning star. Others wore uniforms from ships long gone to the deep. They were looking up at him and smiling. By the time autumn's first frost glazed the grass of Greymouth, the deaths had become harder to explain. A merchant captain found slumped over his desk, lungs full of seawater despite never leaving shore. 2 dockhands discovered in an empty warehouse, faces pale and swollen, boots still dry. Every corpse bore the same mark, a thin black thread tied twice around the wrist. Thomas Vale kept his silence, but each death drew him closer to the truth he didn't want to face. The sea was claiming lives on land now, just as Elias had promised. Vale made his move on a night when the tide was low, the moon a pale sliver above the horizon. Instead of approaching the lighthouse from the road, he scaled the jagged path from the cove. A treacherous climb slick with spray and moss. When he reached the base of the tower, he found the keeper's house dark, its shutters closed tight, but the lantern room above burned with that faint red glow. The sound of the wind was strange here, less like air moving through stone, more like a whisper, words just beyond the reach of understanding. He slipped inside. The place smelled of brine and something fouler, like meat left too long in the sun. On the table lay a weathered journal, its pages warped by damp. In careful, deliberate script, Elias had written an account of July 14, 1879, the day Margaret Wren drowned. The entry was detailed. The Wellington Belle had struck a reef in calm weather. Elias claimed he saw men aboard cutting the ship's only remaining longboat free. Men from Greymouth itself, including the harbor master at the time. They left the women and children, including Margaret, trapped aboard as the tide rose. And then came the part Val didn't want to believe. Elias wrote that he climbed down the cliffs that night, in the blackest part of the tide, and waded into the surf until the water was at his chest. There, among the waves, a figure rose, white as moonlight, hair floating around her face. Not Margaret. Something older. She spoke in no tongue I knew, the journal read, but I understood. She offered a trade, her power for my vengeance. I agreed before she finished asking. Beneath the words was a drawing of the crimson lamp, its symbols curling like tentacles around the brass. The notes beneath claimed it was forged from the breath of the deep and lit by the eyes of the drowned. A floorboard groaned. Vale looked up to find Elias standing in the doorway, his gray eyes unreadable. "You've been busy," Elias said. Vale's voice was tight. "You're killing innocents now. This has nothing to do with the men who cut that boat loose." Elias stepped closer. "Do you think I decide who is innocent? The sea knows every debt. She knows every name. I'm just the keeper of her accounts." Without warning, the sound of rushing water filled the room. Vale turned, only to see it seeping under the door, impossibly fast, swirling around his boots though they were 3 stories above the tide. Faces pressed up from beneath the black water, mouths moving soundlessly. One face rose higher than the rest, Margaret's. Her eyes were as pale as Elias's, her lips forming a single word: stay. Vale stumbled back, heart pounding, as Elias lifted the crimson lamp from its hook. The shadows on the walls writhed, and the air turned heavy, tasting of salt and iron. When Vale finally fled down the cliff path, the tide was still low, the rocks dry, yet his boots dripped seawater all the way to the village. And behind him in the lantern room, the red glow burned brighter than ever. By winter, Greymouth was a haunted place. Half the harbor's ships had wrecked, and more than a dozen villagers were found drowned in their homes or on dry land. The black thread mark had become a death sentence. Once you woke with it on your wrist, you had less than a day before the sea claimed you. Thomas Vale hadn't slept in 2 nights. The mark now circled his own wrist, the knots tight and unyielding. He knew he had until the next tide. If he was going to stop Elias Wren, it had to be now. The night was clear, the sea almost glassy under a winter moon. Vale climbed the cliff road, his breath turning to frost in the air. The lighthouse rose before him like a black spear, the red glow in its crown visible for miles. When he reached the keeper's house, the door swung open as if waiting for him. The air inside was thick with the smell of brine, so strong it stung his eyes. Water pooled on the floor, reflecting the dim lamplight like a mirror. Shapes moved just beneath the surface. He climbed the spiral stairs, each step groaning under his weight. At the top, Elias stood in the lantern room, the crimson lamp swinging in slow arcs. His face was pale, his hair slicked back with seawater. Around his feet, puddles rippled though there was no wind. "You came," Elias said, almost kindly. I didn't have a choice, Vale replied, raising the boat hook he brought from the docks. End this, Elias. Break the bargain. Elias's expression hardened. You think it's mine to break? She owns me now. She owns us all. As he spoke, the glass walls of the lantern room darkened, the night sea pressing up against them like a living thing. Faces swam in that black water, men, women, children, eyes wide and unblinking. Vale's stomach twisted as he recognized villagers, sailors, even Jonas Creel. Vale charged. The boat hook caught the chain of the crimson lamp, wrenching it from Elias's grasp. The lamp swung violently, smashing into the Fresnel lens. Glass shattered in a shriek of sound, and the red flame inside guttered. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the water came. It burst from the broken glass panes, as if the ocean itself had risen to claim the tower. Vale was slammed against the wall, the cold biting through his coat. Elias stood in the center of it all, arms wide, as the water swirled around him in a vortex. From the depths rose her, the figure from Elias's journal, skin like pearl, hair drifting in unseen currents, eyes black as the abyss. She reached for Elias, her mouth curling into something between a smile and a snarl. Elias looked at Val one last time. Tell her I kept the light, he said, and stepped into her arms. They vanished beneath the water. Vale awoke on the rocks at dawn, coughing up seawater. The lighthouse stood dark against the pale sky, its lantern room shattered, the great lens destroyed. There was no sign of Elias, the crimson lamp, or the sea woman, but as Vale stumbled back toward Greymouth, he noticed something on his wrist. The black thread was gone. In the weeks that followed, no more ships wrecked on the rocks. No one drowned in their sleep. The villagers called it a blessing, a turning of the tide. But sometimes, on fog-heavy nights, sailors swear they see a faint red glow out at sea, far from shore, swinging slowly, calling them closer. And if you listen hard enough, they say you can hear a voice on the wind, whispering from the deep, "Keep the light, keep the light."